All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Land Use Committee meeting of Monday, July 23rd. Sorry, this microphone's a little crazy here. I'm Katie Tang, chair of this committee, and today I am joined by Vice Chair Supervisor Jane Kim, and to my left we have Supervisor Catherine Stephanie joining us to fill in for Supervisor Safai. Our clerk is Erica Major, and from SFGov TV we'd like to thank Jim Smith and Charles Kremenak. So I guess before we begin, can we get a motion to excuse Supervisor Safai from land use?
So moved.
Okay, we'll do that without objection. All right, Madam Clerk, are there any announcements for us?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of a file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the July 31st Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you. Can you please call item 1?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to create a 2-year pilot program removing public notice and planning commission review for certain uses in districts 4 and 11, modifying zoning controls for certain uses in districts 4 and 11, and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you. And colleagues, we already heard this item in Land Use Committee. It's our pilot program to attract more businesses to locate in districts 4 and 11. Today, we just have amendments to introduce in light of the process improvements legislation that was passed by the Board of Supervisors. There has been a whole entire reorganization of the planning code. And so the amendments that I'm introducing today literally just put our legislation in the proper sections now, given that change in the planning code. So I won't have any further comments on that, but it's just really a technical change. And if we can adopt these amendments, then I'd like to send it out to the full board as a committee report. Okay. So questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll open up item 1 to public comment then. Any members of the public? Item 1, Mr. Kornilowicz.
Good afternoon, Supervisor. My name is Henry Kornilowicz, President of the San Francisco Council of District Merchants Association. This is really great legislation. Thank you, Supervisor Tang, and also Supervisor Safai. We're having a hard time these days with your online shopping, and then there's vacant storefronts that don't generate the foot traffic that we'd like to have for our shops and so forth. I'm not actually speaking on behalf of the council because we did not vote on this, but I did, however, contact Albert Shao from Taraval, Bill Barnacle from Outer Sunset, and Grace from in Excelsior, and they really are supportive of this legislation, and I urge you to pass it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on item 1, please come on up. Okay, please come on up if you want to comment on item 1.
I'll make it very quick. Scott Hauge, I have a business on 33rd and Taraval, and I'm just here to support this proposal. I think it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other members of the public on item 1? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. So colleagues, can we get a motion to first adopt the amendments to this legislation?
So moved.
Okay, we'll do that without objection. And then on the underlying item as amended as a committee report with positive recommendation to the full board?
I will make that motion.
Okay, great. We'll do that without objection. Thank you, colleagues. Madam Clerk, item 2, please.
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow catering as an accessory use to limited restaurants under certain conditions and making appropriate findings.
Okay, this is an item that is sponsored by Supervisor Safai, who's not here today. I don't know if he has staff who was going to comment, but I believe this was just continued last week as well due to amendments. So if I don't see anyone else, then we'll go to public comment on item 2. Any members of the public?
Hi, Supervisor Henry Kornilowicz again from the Council of District Merchants. Again, a nice piece of amendment there with the catering at these restaurants that a lot of them close at a certain time, or they have like Black Mondays when they close on the Mondays. And this just gives an opportunity for the caterers to get out there that provide service to a lot of the communities around town. And so this is another piece of legislation that I really applaud. And again, the three that I spoke with, and the locations I think are really great. So we're looking forward to having this passed too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on item 2? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. And I too am very supportive of this legislation. I think we do need to be more creative around retail or commercial spaces and figuring out how we can best have more people occupy spaces with a more flexibility. So our office is actually going to have more follow-up legislation to that effect soon as well. So with that said, again, this was just continued from last week. So if we can get a motion on item 2. I'll move this. Oh. With positive recommendation? With recommendation. Okay, great.
Can we have that go as a committee report?
Oh, yes, as a committee report. Great. Thank you for the reminder. And we'll do that without objection. Thank you. Item 3, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code and the zoning map to establish the 2101 Lombard Street Special Use District and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to the sponsor, Supervisor Stephanie.
At this time, I'd like to ask for a continuance to the call of the chair.
For item 3? Okay. Any members of the public who wish to speak on item 3? We're going to open it up to public comment. Oh, I'm sorry, we have staff report as well. No? Oh, public comment? Yes, public comment.
Hello, this is Cynthia Gomez, research analyst, Unite Here Local 2, and as this item was proposed for continuance, that was the ask that we came to make, and so we definitely support a move for continuance so that there's an opportunity to understand more what the project sponsor is proposing and have a chance to engage with them.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on item 3? Okay, seeing none, public comment on item 3 is closed. And Supervisor Stephanie.
Yes, I would just like to add that this item will actually be heard at the Planning Commission in October, so we won't hear this in land use until after that, and there will be plenty of time to have conversations with the community around this legislation. It's not actually a proposed project at this time, but we look forward to a robust community engagement on this legislation.
Great, thank you very much. So that item continued to the call of the chair, and we just did that. Okay, did we do that? Okay, motion to continue to call the chair? Okay, do that without objection. All right, item 4, please.
Item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning code to conditionally permit massage establishments in the Union Street Neighborhood Commercial District and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you, and I'll turn it over again to Supervisor Stephanie.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang, for hearing this item today. Just a brief background, this ordinance will allow 3 businesses in the Union Street Neighborhood Commercial District, which happen to be massage establishments on Union Street, to be conditionally permitted. Currently, they are not allowed because they didn't file in time under Supervisor Tang's 2015 Massage Establishments Ordinance. We propose a path to legalization here to support the continuance of small businesses in the Union Street NCD. And on March 26th, the Planning Commission heard and approved this ordinance. The Commission did provide 2 recommendations which we agree with. So I would like to propose 2 amendments which came from the Planning Commission's recommendations. And the first will amend Note 1 on page 2 to include an 18-month timeline for filing a building permit application to actually legalize their business. And the second recommendation will amend on page 2, let's see, we'll amend it to specify that only massage uses currently within the Union Street Neighborhood Commercial District may avail themselves of this legalization process, including the exemption from the conditional use authorization requirement. And I can read the amendments into the record if that's necessary. No, okay. So these are 3 businesses that are currently in operation: Equinox Fitness, Element Bodywork, Spa Radiance. They did not file in time. This would give them one last chance to do so, and it was approved by the Planning Commission. Diego Sanchez is here from the Planning Department if you have any questions, but I urge your support on this piece of legislation. If not, we'll have 3 more vacancies on Union Street, and these are 3 vetted establishments in the Union Street Neighborhood Commercial District.
Thank you, Supervisor Stephanie. Mr. Sanchez?
Diego Sanchez with Planning Department staff. I'd just like to reiterate the Planning Commission's recommendation. It was very much in support of this ordinance, voted unanimously to support this. with the modifications that Supervisor Stephanie had mentioned. And they did this because they thought these two modifications would help improve the legalization process and implementation going forward. So that concludes my presentation, and as mentioned, I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, seeing no other questions, comments, and we'll open up item 4 to public comment. Any members of the public who wish to speak? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed on item 4. Supervisor Stephanie, if you want to make a motion on that one.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Yes, I'd like to move this forward to the full board with positive recommendation.
Deputy City Attorney John Gibner.
This amendment will trigger a continuance in land use, so the committee should continue it and send it out next week.
I'd like to amend my motion and move this, continue this for 1 week to the Land Use Committee.
Okay. All right, we'll do that without objection. The item is continued for 1 week.
Madam Chair, were there
yes.
amendments to accept prior to that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess we have to accept the amendments that Supervisor Stephanie stated previously. So we will rescind the vote on that. Supervisor Stephanie.
Thank you again. Yes, I'd like to move to accept the amendments that were read and then continue this to the next Land Use Committee hearing.
Okay, we'll do the amendments first, so we can do that without objection. Okay, without objection. And then on the underlying item as amended, continue for 1 week. We'll do that without objection as well. All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, item 5, please.
Item number 5 is an ordinance amending the planning code in order to correct errors in enacted legislation, update outdated references, clarify existing requirements, and reenact existing text inadvertently deleted in the reorganization of Articles 7 and 2 and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you. We have David Broski here from Planning Department.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. David Broski, Planning Department staff. The item is the 2018 Code Corrections Ordinance, but amends the planning code to correct textual errors and improve the readability of the code itself. The proposed amendments also help complete Article 2 and 7 reorganization, as well as overlooked items within the cannabis ordinance. The majority of the amendments are not considered substantive, with a few exceptions, however. One would be the amendment to Section 145.4 that would allow an exception to ground floor commercial use requirements in the C3 and C2 districts. The code is currently silent on it, but has provisions for all other zoning districts in the code. The second is from the cannabis ordinance, which would remove duplicative noticing requirements and the mandatory DR requirement for all MCDs. The change is consistent with the intent of the recently adopted cannabis regulations, and the failure to remove this provision was a drafting error. A third substantive amendment came at the request of the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. The proposal would change the word median to market in Section 415. MOHCD contends that using the median as the benchmark is not a valid standard for the problem, and the provision for the problem this provision is attempting to solve. The Planning Commission voted to approve the ordinance with modifications on April 19th of this year. The one recommendation is the replacement of the mistakenly removed provision that allows limited commercial uses to be conditionally permitted in historic buildings in RTO and RTOM zoning districts per Section 186.3. This was inadvertently deleted as part of the Article 2 reorganization. This amendment has already been added to the ordinance. So staff also has some additional corrective amendments, which include page 2, where we are deleting Section 312 from the list of sections being amended, since 312 is being completely revamped as part of the process improvement ordinance. It's being taken out completely of this ordinance because the corrections are no longer needed. Page 6, line 5, all accessory uses sections in this code are being added to the definition for reference. Page 8, line 24, and page 9, lines 5 through 24. This table was repeated in the version adopted by the Commission. The change removes the duplicated section of the table and adds the correction to NC3 and NCT3 to the table that's remaining. Page 10, line 9, revising the sentence to ensure that it applies to both Section 102 and Article 8. Page 33 through 34, Section 206.3 has been amended to conform with the HOPE SF legislation that passed first reading on Tuesday of last week. Page 59 through 60, removal of Section 312 for reasons previously mentioned. We respectfully request that the committee makes these amendments and move the item forward with a positive recommendation. This concludes staff's presentation. Available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And then also just to clarify, I think I saw in there that we are also adding a reference to the Taraval Street restaurant sub-district because it was not carried over into the new format as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I know that is a handful there. Colleagues, do you have any questions, comments on the massive planning code cleanup that does happen regularly? No? Okay. All right. Hopefully everything was caught there. Why don't we go to public comment then on item 5? Any members of the public who wish to speak on item 5? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. So with that said, colleagues, there are a number of amendments that were just suggested, and I'd be happy to help adopt those on behalf of the planning department. So I'll make a motion then to adopt those amendments as was stated on the record. Can we do that without objection? Okay. All right, so, I'm sorry? Yes. So if we can get a motion on the underlying item as amended.
I would just like to move this forward as a committee report.
Okay, as amended. Thank you very much. We'll do that without objection. All right, moving right along here. Okay, I think we need to call item 6 now.
Item number 6 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow limited non-conforming uses in specified zoning districts to operate between the hours of 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. with conditional use authorization and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you. We have Mr. Aaron Starr here from the Planning Department.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs. The item before you is an ordinance sponsored by the Planning Commission, which would allow limited non-conforming uses in specified zoning districts to operate between the hours of 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. with conditional use authorization. Currently, these uses are only permitted to operate between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Limited non-conforming uses are typically found in our residential districts. When San Francisco rezoned large areas of the city to residential only in the 1970s, these businesses were allowed to continue to operate and stay open per the limitations outlined in Section 186. These uses are also allowed to reconstitute with conditional use authorization when the use is abandoned. That process is how this ordinance came to be. From a conditional use authorization hearing for the legalization of a non-conforming event and performance art venue located at 3359 Cesar Chavez Street, also known as Chicken John's. The applicant wanted the ability to stay open until midnight, but the code did not permit the hours of operation to extend beyond 10 p.m. During the hearing, the commission thought this business should be able to stay open till midnight, so they asked the department to draft an ordinance that would allow for the extension of the hours of operation for limited non-conforming uses. The commission then heard this particular ordinance on April 19th of this year and voted to approve the ordinance. That concludes my presentation, and I thank you for your consideration on this item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Starr. And was there any sort of community outreach on this, and were there any comments that the commission or department received on the extended hours or potential extended hours of operation?
There were no comments during the Planning Commission hearing.
Okay. Supervisor Kim?
That was also one of my questions. And I was also curious what other types of uses typically fall under this category?
Mostly they're like your corner store that you still see in residential districts. Sometimes there'll be a restaurant or an architect's office or things like that.
Those are legally non-conforming.
Yes.
But were grandfathered in the
right.
70s.
And about 2-3 years ago, the board passed an ordinance that allowed these uses to be reestablished if for some reason they went out of business.
Okay.
So vacant ones that have been vacant for more than 3 years can then get a conditional use authorization to open up a sort of low impact commercial use in these spaces again.
So retail, low impact office, and spaces like these that are arts and type of, is it General Assembly too?
I'm not sure what Chicken John's is considered. It must be some general entertainment or something like that.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Starr. Seeing no other questions, comments, we'll open up item 6 to public comment. Any members of the public who wish to speak, please come on up. All right, light public comment today. Okay, so we will close public comment on item 6, and colleagues, can we get a motion on it, the item?
So moved.
Okay, we'll
With recommendation.
take a motion to send forth to the full board with positive recommendation. All right, I'll do that without objection. All right. The moment you've all been waiting for, let's call items 7 and 11 together, please.
7 through 11?
Yes, sorry, 7 through 11.
Item number 7 is an ordinance amending the general plan by adding the central south of Market area plan, making conforming amendments, and making appropriate findings. Item number 8 is an ordinance amending the zoning map of the planning code to create the central south of Market special use district and make other amendments to the height and bulk district maps and zoning use district maps consistent with the Central Soma area plan and making appropriate findings. Item number 9 is an ordinance amending the business and tax regulations and planning codes to create the Central South of Market Housing Sustainability District to provide a streamlined ministerial approval process for certain housing projects within the district, creating an expedited Board of Appeals process for appeals of projects within the district and making appropriate findings. Item number 10 is an ordinance amending the administrative and planning codes to give effect to the Central South of Market area plan and making appropriate findings. And item number 11 is an ordinance amending the administrative code special tax financing law to authorize special tax financing of certain facilities and services related to the Central Soma area plan.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Supervisor Kim.
Thank you so much, Chair Tang, and we did already hear this item last week at the Land Use Committee, and I made a series of amendments, 48 in total, largely technical, all discussed at the Planning Commission, which we incorporated into the Central Soma ordinance last Monday. I have a second series of amendments that I am introducing today, largely requested by either project sponsors or members of the community that would require re-referral to the Planning Commission. This would allow all the amendments, I hope, to be heard at the Planning Commission altogether, so that when this item comes back to Land Use Committee in the fall, there will no longer be a referral to the Planning Department. And so I've just distributed a list of these amendments. I'm happy to answer any questions that committee members may have. In the meantime, what I would suggest is that we move to public comment on these items so that committee members have a chance or opportunity to read through the amendments if they haven't had that opportunity. I did want to offer the Planning Department staff an opportunity to say a few words. I know that our director, John Ram, is here, along with planners Lisa Chen and Josh Switsky. I see that Amy Chan from MOHCD is here. And so we do have them here if they want to make any remarks. Director Ram, because you are here and we don't often see you at Land Use Committee, and it's a walk, I want to give you an opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you. No, I actually don't think we have a whole lot to add today. I just want to say how much I appreciate, Supervisor Kim, your leadership on this and working with us on these changes, and we're very aware of them all, so I will not take up any more of your time, but thank you.
Thank you, Director Ram, and I just want to say it has really been a pleasure to work with the Planning Department on this plan, and I'm really looking forward to seeing us approve this plan in the fall. Just some quick highlights just so members of the public can understand some of the amendments that we are making here today. I had mentioned that some of them were requested by project sponsors. They're predominantly all amendments that would allow more housing on sites. So whether it is on some of our key sites where we're allowing flexibility where they're currently a zoned hotel, we're also giving them flexibility to build housing as well and to keep their height. We're also allowing some exceptions on bulk on certain parcels, again, to increase housing. For projects that decide to participate in HSD, the Housing Sustainability District, AB 73, we are requiring these projects to build 100% of their inclusionary units on site. We feel that if you're going through the ministerial process, that we would like these project sponsors to build their obligation entirely on site. This not only accelerates the production of housing, but ensures that below market rate, both low-income and middle-income housing projects get built with these larger projects. So Seeing no further comments or questions currently, Madam Chair, if we could open up for public comment.
All right, thank you, Supervisor Kim, for the introduction. And yes, because this is the first time I'm seeing the round of amendments for today, I may have some after looking through this, but we will open it up to public comment. Items 7 through 11, Central Soma. If any members of the public wish to speak, please come on up.
Oh, and we have some speaker cards. My apologies. Anita Diaz, Jim Warshell, Cynthia Gomez, Anthony Veerkamp, Mike Bueller, Andrew Wolfram, Cindy Heitzman, Jonathan Haber, and Susan Millhouse.
Thank you to the committee. My name is Anita Denz, D-E-N-Z. I'm here and representing the Victorian Alliance of San Francisco. We are the city's oldest all-volunteer nonprofit organization dedicated to historic preservation. And founded in 1973, we protested the destruction of the city of Paris, particularly the Dome, and went on to defend and protest against the destruction of Victorian housing in the Western Addition. Now, through 45 highly popular house tours, we've raised and awarded over $400,000 in grants to worthy projects, $60,000 of which went to SFRPD, including the Palace of Fine Arts, the windmills of Golden Gate Park, and Portals of the Past. When it comes to the Old Mint, we are very passionate about this wonderful historic landmark of the city. We have endowed it with $23,000 in grants over the years, and most recently in 2014, we were able to repaint the two historic receiving rooms, the cashier's room and the receiving room. We had some pushback from the Office of Economic Workforce Development about this because they were taking over stewardship. But we persisted, and those rooms are glorious today. And the city and their events contractor, Nonplus Ultra, has benefited greatly from these rooms. The Alliance has held many meetings at the Old Mint because we have no headquarters of our own. We participate every year in the History Days and History Expo events with 80 of our historic partners, and our officers have participated in the California Historical Society focus groups on the revitalization of the Mint. So we strongly support full funding of the project funds awarded for the revitalization of this.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Mike Bueller, President and CEO of San Francisco Heritage. I, too, am here today to advocate for maintaining the city's pre-existing commitment of $20 million towards the Old Mint project. In 2015, San Francisco Heritage successfully nominated the Mint to the National Trust's list of 11 most endangered places, making it one of very few buildings in the nation to be featured on the list twice. We've also been longtime advocates for the Soma Pilipinas Cultural Heritage District and for sustaining the local Filipino community amid the inevitable transformation that will result from adoption of the plan. To be sure, the Old Mint is a citywide and even a national preservation priority, but its future largely depends on coming up with a mix of uses that address the needs and desires of the surrounding South of Market community. The vision for the future of the Mint is expansive and community-focused. Far from becoming just a museum, the city and the California Historical Society seeks to transform the Mint into a community cultural commons for the immediate neighborhood and the city as a whole, which can range from cultural programming to providing office space for displaced nonprofit organizations. CHS will be initiating a formal process this fall to further define the cultural commons concept, building on over a dozen community workshops and public workshops held last year in partnership with Shaping San Francisco. Indeed, the blockbuster success of events at the Mint, including the Filipino Night Market and History Days, underscores the Mint's potential to serve the Central Soma community and the city's commitment to that vision. While Central Soma has enormous potential to generate community benefits, it will also result in a tremendous loss of cultural resources. Heritage sees the Mint as a tremendous opportunity to preserve and interpret the social history of the neighborhood while hosting programming that will help sustain the existing cultural communities. We hope that in the months ahead that we'll be able to work with the board to maintain the city's funding commitment and explore uses that are truly relevant to the immediate neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, members of the Rules Committee. My name is Andrew Wolfram, and I'm the president of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission. On March 21st, 2018, the Historic Preservation Commission held a hearing in which we reviewed the draft Central Soma Area Plan. At that time, we did not have these amendments that are proposed. At that time, the Historic Preservation Commission unanimously adopted a resolution stating that we were in support of the plan because it preserved and celebrated the neighborhood's cultural heritage by helping fund the rehabilitation and maintenance of historic buildings and funding social programs for the neighborhood's existing residents. We also stated that we recommended increasing financial support for the Old Mint under the Central Soma Plan to at least $50 million in order to rehabilitate and stabilize the structure, including seismic and life safety upgrades. And we also recommended providing increased financial support for the arts under the Central Soma Plan of at least $50 million so that the preservation, promotion, and programming of tangible and intangible cultural heritage activities in the community are well presented. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jim Warshaw. I'm president of San Francisco Victorian Alliance. There's so much good in the work you're doing here. It's kind of surprising that the first group of speakers you're hearing are talking about something that's less than 1% of the total plan, and it's around the historic preservation issues around the Old Mint. Historic preservation support is critical. Obviously, our citizens love the resources, and we owe it to our future generations to protect these resources. I fully concur with what Ms. Dents, Mike Bueller from Heritage, and Mr. Wolfram representing HDC all said. We should be looking at $50 million of support for this, not even 20. The idea that we would be looking at cutting the 20 to 15 or less is rather appalling. You know, we've had this thing go from their recommendation of 15 to a first estimate of 30 that would be budgeted to 20, and now we're talking about cutting it further. Our resources are absolutely critical, and this indisputably is the most key historic public resource in the district. We need this not only for our residents, but for tourism. This is in a key tourist zone. I'm reminded that the National Trust is going to be out here. Not only is this an endangered resource, but they're meeting here for the first time in 20 years. If we do another cut to this, my message to them is that San Francisco really doesn't support its historic resources. Please don't let this happen. I would like to present a recommendation that we are standing behind our most important resources. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Cynthia Gomez, Research Analyst, Unite Here Local 2. As you heard, only a few items before. And I'll keep my remarks brief because I know that, for one thing, I am still getting up to speed on a lot of the amendments as they're getting proposed, and I also understand that the process of drafting these amendments is deliberately designed to be flexible to respond to community needs as they evolve and to community advocacy. And so I want to applaud Supervisor Kim for keeping that process open and responsive. So what I will do is just reiterate our support for a couple of particular projects that are included in the Central Soma Plan. One is the One Vassar project, which is identified as a key development site, and they stand out to us as an example of what key development sites can bring in terms of enforceable commitments to build hotels with union labor and to staff hotels with, and to allow a fair process for hotel staff to become union. And as I'm pretty sure I mentioned last week, One Vassar is seeking support for changes that would allow a rooftop deck for their hotel project, which we definitely support. 816 Folsom, we mentioned last week as well. It seems like there is positive momentum in discussions between the project sponsors at 816 Folsom and the community in response to community concerns. So we hope to hear soon that those have gone well, and in particular for 816 Folsom, that sponsor reached out to us early on to sign enforceable commitments again to staff union and build union, their proposed hotel. So we hope that all the zoning changes that are proposed would preserve 816 Folsom's opportunity to build a hotel at that site. And lastly, there's a proposed hotel at 399 Fifth Street. We don't have an agreement yet with that project sponsor, but we're working in good faith towards that goal. And so we would hope to keep 399 Fifth Street alive to be able to make further progress towards that goal. Thank you.
Supervisor Kim and Commissioners, my name is Cindy Heitzman. I'm the Executive Director of the California Preservation Foundation, located at 5 3rd Street in San Francisco. I'm speaking to you on behalf of our 15,000 members and supporters to ask you to retain the $20 million allocated to the restoration of the San Francisco Mint. Please do not reduce the funding at this critical time. With the preliminary planning for the restoration of the Mint underway, a reduction in funding can affect the momentum for the restoration of this National Historic Landmark. Though the building has national significance and has languished for years, it now has huge potential to serve local community. I can speak personally to the positive impact a restored, fully functioning Mint building will have. Our office has been located in San Francisco for over 15 years and we're now facing displacement. We're located in an office building that's planned to be converted to a hotel. Speaking as the director of a nonprofit that is faced with finding a new home, remaining in San Francisco is a challenge. Finding space to serve others is difficult, and I'm certain that we are not alone. A restored Mint building promises to be a cultural common, which can have enormous benefits for organizations like ours. We stand with the California Historical Society and the City of San Francisco to realize this vision. Now is not the time to alter the progress made by reducing funding for this national landmark as vital community service. Thank you.
Now, I couldn't say in such eloquent terms that Cindy just said what I mean to say, but what I wanted to add to that is my name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. As I lead tours, groups of people every 2 weeks by the Mint, and when they look at that place, their eyes open widely, and they want to see more. And these people are from all over the world, and they're appreciating a site, like many sites in San Francisco, for which it's known for and for which it should continue to be known for. So when you're considering cutting the funding from $20 million to $15 million, also consider the impact that it has on both the visitors and the people that live in the city and the surrounding environment. And please don't cut it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Anthony Veerkamp. I'm the Director of Policy Development with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, a private nonprofit organization dedicated to saving America's historic places. I'm also a 27-year resident of the neighborhood, broadly speaking. I live at Macapan in Valencia Market, and I mention that because I'm a beneficiary of city housing programs that have allowed people who work for nonprofits to stay in the city, and I recognize that there's a lot in this plan that will help people like me stay in the city, and I'm grateful for that. However, the National Trust strongly opposes the proposal to reduce funding for the Old Mint from 20 to 15 million. And in fact, we concur with the Historic Preservation Commission's resolution recommending that that figure, in fact, be raised to 50 million. The National Trust has a long-standing commitment to a revitalized and restored Mint. We placed the Mint on our annual endangered list of America's most endangered historic places in 1993, and then we did it again in 2015, making it one of very few buildings that's appeared twice and the only one in San Francisco that's ever been on our endangered list. We also served on both Mayor Jordan and Mayor Brown's task force. While the $20 million in funding is less than is appropriate, it's an essential piece of the funding puzzle that must be assembled to assure the Old Mint's restoration and reactivation. As a city-owned National Historic Landmark and an unparalleled civic and cultural asset, the Old Mint holds great promise to serve as a civic and cultural linchpin connecting downtown, the Civic Center, and South of Market. The National Trust respectfully requests that you reject the proposed amendment to the Central SOMA plan that would lower its allocation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Karen Kai, and I've been active in historic preservation since about the late 1990s. And I've done that as part of an effort for community building for Japantown. I'm not here representing any organizations from Japantown, I'm here as an individual. But what I've seen is that a historic building that has meaning to people, that is implemented by people who care about their community and are involved, can make a huge difference. It can become a point of pride, a point for displaced organizations, a point where our history comes together and we share it. And this has happened in Japantown. It happens in other places. I'm also part of an organization called APIA HIP, Asian and Pacific Islander Americans in Historic Preservation. We're a national nonprofit historic preservation organization. We're going to be having our national forum, biennial forum, here in San Francisco in November. This is our 5th forum. It's really significant to us. And throughout the time that we have held these events, the California Historical Society has been a key partner. They've helped us grow. They've helped us bring our programs together. They will do the kind of work that will make the Old Mint a very important structure for not just the city, not just the nation, but for our communities. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Paul Wormer. And I realize I can't add a lot to what people have already said about the importance of the Old Mint. The one thing I would like to re-emphasize is that when you have a place as majestic as the Old Mint, it helps people focus and it helps tell the stories about the past that help inform where we are today and perhaps help us better understand the problems we're facing and possible ways of moving forward. And the Old Mint is one of those magnificent structures. And I urge you, please maintain, even increase the funding for the Old Mint. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Millhouse, and I'm here as a San Francisco resident. And I'm here to support maintaining the $20 million currently allocated for the repair and restoration of the old U.S. Mint. We've heard a lot of speakers here today talking very eloquently about restoring the Mint because of its historical significance. I'd like to just say that I'd like to restore it for the activation that it can provide not only to the Mint Plaza, which is next door, but to the surrounding neighborhood and to the greater San Francisco city as well. Supervisor Kim's proposed amendment to reduce by $5 million the critical funding for the Mint will severely jeopardize these plans and to reactivate this historic and beautiful building. So just to restate and to keep it short, I'm here to support keeping the $20 million currently allocated under the Central SOMA plan and even to increase it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Aaron Highland. I'm a 26-year resident of the Castro, as well as the vice president of the Historic Preservation Commission. President Wolfram spoke for our commission, but I thought it was important to give a little background on why we felt it was important to increase the funding from $20 million to $50 million. And the Old Mint is in dire need of stabilization. What that means is that the envelope needs to be repaired so that water stays out, needs to be braced for seismic, in the case of seismic events, and ultimately, once the envelope is maintained and stabilized, then the building won't be in jeopardy of getting further deteriorated. This is an approach that was applied to the Williams Building on 3rd and Mission, which was stabilized in the mid-90s and has now become an anchor to really successful development with the St. Regis. So I implore you to, at least at a minimum, maintain the $20 million funding. Thank you.
Hi, Supervisors. I have a copy of our appeal letter here, which we'll discuss in a minute. We're happy that the city is now beginning to look at a right of first refusal. Again, David Wu with South of Market Community Action Network. But we still have a long way to go to address gentrification and displacement in this plan, and we still have significant issues and concerns with the plan as it currently exists. To prevent displacement now, the city must aggressively purchase existing rent-controlled buildings. There should be no $15 million cap for small sites funds, and the 10% of inclusionary fees that go towards the program should be raised. These constraints limit the number of buildings that can be purchased. To date, only a handful of sites have been land trusted in SOMA compared to over 350 rent-controlled sites identified by SOMCAN that could potentially be purchased. One of the main aims of the SOMA Filipinas Cultural District is to preserve existing residents, and this strategy of buying buildings has been proven to do just that. Privately owned public open spaces remain completely inadequate as open spaces in the plan for children, youth, and families, which they do not serve. The plan must require that POPOs are youth and families serving by having a standards design in place that is created in partnership with community. No incentive should be given to developers to provide things like parks in their POPOs. This should be required. Rather than giving exemptions to developers on already currently inadequate POPOs, the whole POPOs process under this plan needs to be fundamentally redesigned to serve children and families. The addition of 505 Brandon Street as a new key site in this plan was not vetted by community members. This further shows how this plan is a plan by and for developers. Even at this very late stage in the plan process, a new key site is added without adequate explanation as to why this is a key site for community and how the site is beneficial to the public. As the plan continues to bounce around various committees and last-minute changes are made to the plan, there must be full transparency with the public, including updating schedules on the planning website and sending out notifications to the public on any changes to dates and times. We will discuss other concerns in our EIR appeal, which can be read in our letter that's contained right here. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, just for full clarification, 505 Brandon was not included as a new key site in the amendments this week or last week. And everything that has been introduced today will be re-referred to the Planning Commission on August 23rd. So there will be an additional month for the community to vet through all of these amendments.
We appreciate that, Supervisor. Thank you. And I just did notice in last week's presentation on the key sites from the Planning Department, 505 Brandon was included in the graphic. So just any clarification would be great for the public. Thank you, Supervisor.
We will work with you on that.
Hello, Supervisors. My name is Claire. I'm with SOMCAN, and I live and work in the South of Market. Continuing with points in our EIR appeal, the following also must be addressed. First, the plan continues to provide an inadequate amount of open space in SOMA by relying on POPOs, which have a negative impact on the community for many reasons. They're privatized, overly regulated, restrictive, not friendly for children, youth, and families, and are not protected by the Prop K shadow ordinance. It is also difficult to establish a standard of shadow protection for these open spaces because CEQA is not specific on this matter. Second, the EIR does not adequately study the health impacts from increased noise, degraded air quality, pedestrian safety hazards, and increased wind speeds. Organizations that work with seniors and people with disabilities in SOMA are concerned that any increase in wind speeds caused by the heights and bulk of proposed buildings in Central SOMA will cause a hardship and injure to seniors and people with disabilities at both public open spaces and in the public rights of way. Similarly, there are concerns around vehicle collisions. The extent of increase in automobile traffic is underreported in the EIR, and the potential incidence of pedestrian injuries from automobiles is also underestimated. Also, degraded air quality from increased traffic will have detrimental impacts. Thirdly, the 5M project must be included in the EIR analysis. With 5M being the largest single development in Central SOMA, it must be considered together with other developments in the Central SOMA plan. They have linked, not dissociated as separate cumulative impacts. Thank you.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Jamie Ann Dunn with SOMCAN. There are several other issues that SOMCAN has raised in our EIR appeal that must be addressed. First, the Central SOMA Plan creates a second financial district at the expense of families, youth, and seniors living and working and going to school in the SOMA. The scale of development and the mix of commercial, office, and high-end luxury development described in the plan are not conducive to a healthy neighborhood. We demand that this EIR be studied against the city's Healthy Development Measurement Tool, which was developed by planning in partnership with the Department of Public Health and community organizations during the Eastern Neighborhoods rezoning. Next, the inadequate transportation infrastructure and impact of ride-hailing companies within and adjacent to the plan area of the DEIR are not fully considered. The transportation infrastructure within and adjacent to the plan area of the Central SOMA EIR lags far behind the infrastructure needs of both past and current growth. The EIR is also negligent in assessing the new impacts of ride-hailing and transportation network company services like Uber and Lyft. The references in the DEIR are completely inadequate. Their impact can in no way be equated with bicycles in terms of traffic or environmental impact. Next, the Central SOMA Plan disregards the SOMA Youth and Family Special Use District. We demand that as part of the Central SOMA Plan, projects within the SOMA Youth and Family Special Use District are required to undergo review and approval by resident groups and community organizations before they are considered by the Planning Department. We're demanding that this community approval process function similarly to other special use districts in the city, such as the Bernal Heights Special Use District. Thank you.
Hi, supervisors. My name is Chantal. I'm also with SOMCAN. Continuing with points in our EIR appeal, the environmental impacts from displacement were not analyzed in the EIR. Regardless of the assertions in the EIR, there are environmental impacts due to displacement of residents from their homes or small businesses in SOMA, especially when considering the huge increase in vehicle miles traveled that will result with this proposed Central SOMA Plan. The gentrification caused by this plan will actually have a quadruple environmental impact by lengthening the commute times of people working in SOMA from their new place of residence outside of the city, replacing these people with a population more likely to own and use automobiles, increasing the number of people living in SOMA as a bedroom community for their commute on a shuttle to the peninsula, and increasing use of ride-hailing and TNC services whose vehicles constantly idle and circle in competition for rides. None of these impacts of gentrification on the environment have been studied, which is a significant flaw in the EIR. Second, the EIR omits analyses of the current trend of residential units not being used as traditional housing. The inadequacy of the EIR is that it studies the impacts of residential development as though it will be used for residences. The environmental impacts of corporate rentals, short-term rentals, and other commercial uses are different from residential uses. Without sufficient controls and enforcement, there's no way to ensure that new housing that is incentivized to be built under this new land use plan will actually be used as housing. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is TJ, also with SOMCAN. Continuing with points in our EIR appeal, consideration of continued PDR uses in Central SOMA is inadequate. There must be more consideration of continued PDR use in the EIR, especially in light of the loss of PDR under the Eastern SOMA Plan. The EIR does not address the lack of affordability of housing incentivized by the plan and the socio-economic makeup of new residents that will result. The plan does not provide any studies or figures that support the claim that new development will drive down housing costs. As the DEIR states on page V-10, what effect development under the plan would have on housing affordability is a matter of considerable controversy, and that the influx of real estate investment in higher income residents may increase gentrification of a neighborhood, with displacement of households being a negative outcome. Further study must be done regarding what effects new housing development will have on housing prices if the plan is serious about its commitment to maintaining a diversity of residents in the area. And finally, the plan does not address the stabilization of SOMA-based nonprofit organizations. By encouraging the construction of a second financial district, commercial rents will become increasingly more expensive, placing nonprofit organizations even more at risk. Low-income and immigrant communities in SOMA rely on many of these nonprofit organizations for basic services and to be able to survive in the community. Without these organizations, SOMA residents will be further at risk for displacement. Displacement does result in environmental impacts. Therefore, the EIR is deficient in that it does not recommend strategies for stabilizing nonprofit organizations in SOMA. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Carol Brownson. I've lived in San Francisco longer than I care to think about right now, and I've watched a lot of changes, many of which have been detrimental to communities, maintaining communities, forming them. And as I came in here, I heard some very well-reasoned arguments, discussion about the importance of the Mint historically. We could learn some history because we seem to be repeating it. And the fact that a mere $20,000 is being taken away from the attempt to restore that marvelous building and a place for community. And so I don't have anything to add to those marvelous things that people have had to say. But I am in a sardonic mood, and I must say I find it very odd to be here in this beautifully maintained historic building, which provides a superb place for gathering of community of the political classes. Would you grant that same benefit to other parts of the city? Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Catherine Petra, and I'm an architectural historian. In 2002, the city commissioned a historic structure report for the Old Mint, and I was part of the team that worked on it. Now I lead tours for Chronicle subscribers at the Mint, and I always make the point that the building is the most significant building in California, if not all the West. In 1874, when the building was completed, the state was just over 20 years old, and the building was a huge source of pride for San Franciscans who looked to the building and thought, we are finally part of the nation. Now we're talking about the Old Mint's restoration, as we have been since 1994. And although progress has been made toward the Old Mint's restoration, it's important to envision how a revitalized Mint can serve as a gathering place for a changing neighborhood, a catalyst for a neighborhood in transition, and a real opportunity for revitalization of not just the building. It's important to realize, though, that in order to achieve this vision, we as a city must come together and we must invest in the Mint's future. It's not going to happen on its own. Whether it's through the community benefits from the Central SoMa Plan or other avenues is for you as city officials to decide. I would just close in saying that Mayor Lee fully supported the future rehabilitation of the city's most valuable underutilized city-owned building, and I hope this committee will too. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Fernando Martí with the Council of Community Housing Organizations, and we would like to associate ourselves with the comments made by We Are SoMa Coalition, which includes several of our member organizations. I'd like to speak more specifically about the Housing Sustainability District that is sort of the newfangled state thing that is going to be incorporated into the Central SoMa Plan. And one of the things, or the main thing, that HSD does is it makes all of the projects moving forward within this HSD a ministerial approval within 120 days, meaning that if there is no approval by the planning department within 4 months, the project moves forward. And we hear over and over again how difficult it is for developers, both market rate and affordable, how it takes sometimes 2 years to get approvals. This is a great boon for developers moving forward. And one of the things that is very gratifying to see in the amendments before you today is that in return, the community asks that those projects actually be built. And so I want to thank the supervisors for putting that amendment before you, a use it or lose it provision that should be part of each and every approval for development. But the other part I think that's important about the HSD is in that every other city, what that law requires is that in exchange for getting that 120-day approval, developers agree to certain labor standards and agree to, if there was no inclusionary zoning, a 10% minimum affordability requirement. We believe that in exchange for that 120-day approval, we should see an additional affordability requirement as part of projects that do this HSD. We hear over and over again how much it costs developers to wait those 2 years. So in exchange for that, we think that we should be able to get, 5% above as what we get as a community benefit in exchange for the HSD. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Bradley Wiedmeyer. I'm an architectural historian, and I come as an architectural historian who was a research assistant to another architectural historian who nearly 60 years ago, before the preservation movement took off in New York City and other places, to stop the demolition of the Mint circa 1960 when a huge parking and tower development was proposed. He didn't like to do those sorts of things, but he did. He did come to this room and speak on behalf of the Mint. And that was Robert Judson Clark, Professor Emeritus. Keep him in our memory. But the Mint's so important, and I know it's hard to fund everything, but the $5 million from the 20, let's put it back, and let's give consideration to the HPC, the Historic Preservation Commission, which is one of our city bodies that's asked for $50 million. I don't know if we can do that, but let's try. The stabilization is so important. Just in my 41 years in San Francisco, waiting for buses at 5th and Mission, you see the cracking of the great granite blocks. The Granite Lady needs stabilization or we're going to lose her. And you see the rust and other things that have to be aggressively addressed. We don't want it to languish, and we don't want this plan to languish. We want this to be a center of community and historic resources. So let's get the full funding and see what we can do above that. Thank you so much.
So seeing no further public comment, through the chair, I'd like to ask that we close public comment on these items.
All right, public comment is now closed for items 7 through 11. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Chair Tang. There are a series of amendments that I have stated on the record prior to our opening of public comment. I also want to add that Sarah Dennis Phillips from OEWD is here as well to answer any questions. A couple of things I want to note in regards to the public comment that was made. There is an ordinance that is currently being drafted by Supervisor Sandra Feuer on the right of first purchase that came up at public comment earlier. There have been meetings where we have discussed small site acquisition, and I'm not sure if I should ask Ms. Chan to speak to that, but if you could speak to how much money is currently available, or Ms. Sarah Dennis Phillips, either. You don't have to come up right at this point. I'll just kind of go through a series of responses. Third, I did want to note again that we have not added any additional key sites to the 9 that were originally in the plan. There is a discussion and there was a request to add 505 Brannan, but that has not been included in any of the amendments last week or this week. Our office is also following up during the recess on drafting a good jobs resolution. This is something that Jobs for Justice Local 2 and We Are SOMA have asked us to do, to ask project sponsors to write and develop a jobs plan for not just the construction jobs, but the long-term jobs that they'll be creating on site within the Central SOMA plan. Finally, our office will be working with the Planning Department to split the current Eastern Neighborhood Citizens Advisory Committee between the south of Market, including now East, Central, and West SOMA, and the Mission, Waterfront, and Shipplace Square neighborhoods. And so that is another trailing ordinance that our office will be working on. I do want to continue the discussions around open space and POPOs. I really appreciate what members of the public have said. There are portions of the Central SOMA plan that are under the Youth and Family SUD, and we certainly should be creating open space and rec centers that cater to youth and families. I do want to note that within the Central SOMA public benefits package that we are setting aside $25 million to renovate and reconstruct the Gene Friend Rec Center, which will also be increasing its square footage simply by increasing the height of the center so that it's not just one level, but it's at minimum 2. We also want to increase funding for activation at Victoria Manalo Joyce Park, as well as build a new public recreational center with a swim swimming pool at the current tennis court site. We're also looking at a new 1-acre park in the southwest portion of the plan, along with a number of other parks. But it is duly noted, the need for youth and family needs, but also seeing how we can work with the POPOs in the area to also serve youth and family needs. And I know Supervisor Yee and Supervisor Fewer and I are certainly in discussions about how to ensure that we have funding set aside for schools and for child care facilities within the Central Soma Plan. And we will be asking the school board to introduce a resolution to dedicate their school impact fees to the South of Market. And we would love the assistance of our committee members here in helping us get that through, because that's not something that the Board of Supervisors can do. That will be through the Board of Education. Finally, on the restoration of the U.S. Mint building, this is not, I don't think we should look at this as a decrease. This is still an increase. When it went to the Planning Commission, the CFD funding that was allocated was proposed at $10 million. We have increased it to $15 million. So it is, I would not look at it as an increase or a decrease in funds, but rather an increase. And I just think that given the immense amount of needs in this community, most importantly, affordable housing and preservation of housing and jobs, including PDR, open space, and public transit, we're just balancing a lot of different needs. And while it may seem that we overwhelmingly heard from one group of stakeholders today, just know that through this 10-year process that we have engaged in many community meetings with hundreds of participants, and we are doing the best that we can to spend limited funds, although a great deal of funds. This will be the most generous community benefits package ever seen in an area plan. It is still a balance of so many different needs, and the Old Mint is a very, very, very small part of that. And so this is still going to be an increase. That amendment has been made under Amendment 15, and we are reallocating funds to a PDR relocation fund, knowing that we are losing many of our PDR uses in the Central Soma plan, and that as many of these key sites and project developers reconstruct and rebuild, we want to ensure that existing PDR had relocation funds to be able to continue to stay in San Francisco and hopefully able to stay in the Central Soma and South of Market neighborhood. So, colleagues, would love to address any questions that have come up now that we've all had time to review the amendments.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Kim, and did have a moment to look through these, so I think most of them are pretty, or thank you for clarifying certain questions that I had. But again, given the sheer volume of commenters that came out today regarding the Mint, I did want to focus some questions around that, not to take away from the fact that this entire plan and how much work went into it. I do want to acknowledge that. And of course, thanks Supervisor Kim and the Planning Department for that work and OEWD. So, but for now, one question I have is regarding the Mint. So yes, I do understand that PDR preservation is incredibly important. I'm wondering, is there a kind of a ballpark number as to how many PDR businesses we're looking at in terms of supporting through this creation of a $10 million relocation fund? Is there any sort of estimate? Thank you, Ms. Chen from Planning Department.
Supervisor, so the this is a new proposal, so the details haven't been fleshed out. So the amendments that you're looking at today are simply to create the fund, and we would need to do more research to really establish the number of businesses and so on. But depending on which data source you look at, there's approximately 150 to 250 PDR businesses that are active in the area, we think. And so it, in terms of how far the 10 million could go, it would depend on what types of services we're providing. Also, Sarah Dennis Phillips from OEWD could speak probably to some of the services we already have for PDR businesses. I think some of the funds could also go to supporting existing services.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So roughly 150 to 200 businesses, but I'd love to see perhaps during the summer or early fall more analysis on that. And then going to the Mint, I'm just curious, and I apologize, I wasn't part of these long discussions with the community, but how was it decided that the money would be taken from what the Mint would have received under the CFD for this relocation fund?
So we would also defer to Supervisor Kim to share more information on this, but we did take a look at the entire public benefits document. So that's $2.2 billion, which is in a range of categories. And we were essentially looking kind of line item by line item to see where we thought maybe there might be other funds that might be available, or everything in there we do prioritize and we think are important, but we were trying to figure out where the key opportunities might be to find additional funding elsewhere.
Okay, maybe Supervisor Kim, I don't know if you have more background on that and how it was arrived at for the Mint.
Well, so total, there is $104 million allocated to the cultural preservation and community services. So if you don't want to just look at the old Mint, because that's just one building, there's $104 million allocated for cultural preservation and community services. Currently, $15 million is dedicated to the restoration of just one building, the U.S. Mint. There's $20 million allocated for the preservation and maintenance of historic buildings throughout the district, and then a mixture of new community facilities, including healthcare clinics and job training centers, social and cultural programming, and capital for cultural amenities, along with neighborhood cleaning, which is, we believe, a key part of making sure that we are helping to preserve a neighborhood. When this was first proposed to the Planning Commission in May, the Old Mint had been allocated $10 million. So this is actually an increase at $15 million. It was at the Planning Commission that many stakeholders also came to speak, asking for an increase in the allocation. It was proposed at $20 million. Again, like I said, if you look at the list of all of the public benefits packages, all of them are incredibly important. And so we just have to play a balancing act. We're dedicating almost $1 billion to new and rehabilitated affordable housing. That is clearly by far and away the most important priority of this neighborhood, is keeping people here in San Francisco. I just don't think that there is any comparable priority in this list as there is with affordable housing. The second largest priority, according to the community and those that live there, is public transit, including both pedestrian safety, regional transit capacity enhancement. This is not just a huge priority for the neighborhood, but a huge priority for our city. Then we have open space, and you've heard a lot from this neighborhood. This district has the smallest and fewest parks of any district in the city, and they actively want to make sure that we are serving our youth and families, many who do live in the South of Market, whether it is a recreational center, expanding our existing parks and rec centers, open space, a new linear park, and making sure that we are keeping the popos maintained, but also in a way that hopefully is of service to the neighborhood, as came up in public comment today. Production, distribution, and repair is also a big priority of this neighborhood. It's not just preserving uses in our city, but it's also preserving certain types of living wage jobs that are not office workers, so it produces a diversity in our workforce. And then we have the cultural preservation community services that I just mentioned at $104 million. Next, we have environmental sustainability and resilience, also very important, making sure that as we build out this incredibly dense neighborhood, that we are working on air quality issues, on noise quality issues, on stormwater management, living roofs, other energy and water efficiency projects. So as this neighborhood grows, we are trying to move forward as carbon neutrally as possible. That is something that has come up in the EIR. It's a great concern to the residents that live in the neighborhood, is making sure that we are keeping the residents healthy and safe, and that as we grow a city, that we are actually the model for what it means to grow and be an environmentally friendly neighborhood. Finally, childcare centers, schools, Bessie Carmichael, this is probably it is the smallest pot. We want to make sure that we are serving our youth and children and families. So when you think about the Old Mint in the context of all of these needs, I think it's a much more difficult conversation. Any of these items singularly alone are incredibly important, and every single advocate wants to increase affordable housing funds, school funds, childcare funds, environmental funds. So the balancing act that we are playing here is what we are bringing before the Land Use Committee today.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. And then I see that another $4 million is coming out of the environmental sustainability and resilience category, as well as $1 million from water recycling and stormwater management. Are those two categories, or how much are they receiving through the CFD, and they will still be okay?
Yes. So This came through some creative brainstorming with both OEWD Planning Department and our office. There are enhanced requirements thanks to several ordinances that this board has passed around stormwater, as well as, sorry, what was the second one? Both stormwater management and water recycling in parks. And so we've reduced this dollar amount, understanding that the need will not be as great because project sponsors will have to provide that on site on their own dime. And so that there would be less of a need for either the impact fees or the CFDs to contribute to that.
Okay. So again, I do appreciate Supervisor Kim explaining kind of this balancing act overall of how to allocate the CFD funds. And I know that this amendment is not to the planning code or the admin code. This is to the implementation program documents and how it is that these community benefits will be, the funds will be allocated to community benefits. But I would like to maybe, following our land use committee hearing, still continue that conversation, just given the amount of kind of concern that we've now heard from folks in the community. So I definitely want to be able to address that, but I hear what you're saying. And I know that this will have to go back to Planning Commission anyhow, but I at least wanted to just make planning staff aware that I would like to follow up with you on it. Okay. Colleagues, any other questions, comments? Supervisor Stephanie?
Yes, I just have one question. I want to thank Supervisor Kim for the context around how the money will be allocated. And I'm just wondering if there's any flexibility in the funding, if there's a process by which money could be reallocated, if needs change, or if something were to happen to the Mint that needed more than $15 million. I'm just wondering how concrete all of this is.
This is an art, not a science. There is going to be some flexibility as time moves forward. And certainly, anytime the CFD is going to have several more layers of approvals via this body, and every time we go out to bond, we're going to have to go through some type of approval with this body. And I imagine that there will continue to be flexing of dollars in different categories. We also have to keep in mind that these dollars don't all come in at once. They're going to come in over a projected 25-year life. And so there's going to also be a very fierce debate and rigorous debate on how and in what years these dollars are spent as well. So I think that you will see a great deal of flexibility via the process into the future. This is a suggested plan of how the funds will be spent down. Now, the impact fees are fairly set in terms of the arenas that they are allocated to, whether it's transit, affordable housing, and open space. Then those buckets, there is an incredible amount of discretion, and all of that actually comes before the Board of Supervisors before they are finally spent down. This CFD, again, has to go through several additional layers of approvals with this Board of Supervisors, and certainly before the first bond is issued, the expenditure plan will come before the Board of Supervisors, so there will be flexibility based on need and also change of cost.
Okay, thank you. And any other questions, comments?
One final comment I just want to make. A member of the public suggested that many of the amendments here that were made were driven by project sponsors, and I want to push back against that only because I have personally not introduced many of the amendments that were requested by project sponsors. We will make sure that they are heard at the Planning Commission, so any amendments that are made at the full board won't require re-referral, but I did want to give the community as much time as possible to evaluate all the different requests, conferences of values as we move forward through the process over the next month and a half. And so very few amendments that were requested by project sponsors were actually included unless they were technical or they increase our ability to build housing within the Central SOMA plan. In fact, if you see any amendments that were included by project sponsors, they all increased housing or were in relation to a specific land dedication that is part of a mixed commercial residential development. So I just want to assure the community that I pulled back the vast majority of project sponsor-driven amendments. We will make sure that they are discussed at the Planning Commission, but the community will have at least a month and a half to go through all of these amendments with our office through a process.
All right, thank you, Supervisor Kim. And yes, looking through your summary from today, I I do agree that most of these amendments are to create more affordable housing. So with that said, what would you like to do with items 7 through 11?
So I would like to make a motion to amend as I had stated prior to public comment, and then I'd like to make a motion to refer items, sorry, let me pull that up. City Attorney John Givner.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner, just speaking with the clerk, the committee should continue the items so that planning will have an opportunity to consider the amendments. And the clerk's office suggests continuing it to a date certain because of noticing requirements so that we don't have to renotice. Practically speaking, the very soonest that the Planning Commission could hear the item and act on it and then send it back to the committee after the board decides the CEQA appeal on September 4th would be September 10th. So if you continued it to September 10th, you could, at that point, if the CEQA appeal is resolved, you could send it to the full board. And if the CEQA appeal is not resolved, you could then continue it again on September 10th.
So for clarification, Mr. Givner, I will continue these items to Monday, September 10th, if the chair deems that date okay. So we don't have to refer items 8, 9, 10, and 11 back to the Planning Commission. We can simply continue. The Planning Commission then can at least hear our amendments and then make recommendations after the appeal on September 4th. Is that correct?
That's right. After you act and continue the items today, the clerk's office will refer all the documents back to planning. Planning can hold a hearing and take an approval action after the board considers the CEQA appeal.
And for item number 7, which are the general plan amendments, the 90 days by which we must act is now told. Am I looking at the right one? Item number 7, the general plan amendments.
That's right.
Which the board typically has to act within 90 days, but because an appeal has been filed, that 90 days has frozen.
That's correct. So the 90 days will not run until after the board acts on the CEQA appeal. So you'll still have time after the CEQA appeal to act on the general plan amendment.
And so I didn't want to make that clear to members of the public who are concerned that item 7 would go into effect if the board did not vote on it because it was past the 90 days, that it is essentially frozen in time until the appeal is heard, and we'll continue item number 7 as well to Monday, September 10th's Land Use Committee meeting.
Okay, and just to clarify, I'm sorry, are we taking the amendments today or no? We are first and then continuing. Okay, thank you. So we have a motion to amend items as stated.
Yes, we have a motion to amend as stated.
And can we do that without objection? Okay, we'll do that without objection.
And a motion to continue these items to Land Use Committee of Monday, September 10th. Many of the amendments that I made today do require referral to the Planning Commission, and we look forward to working with the Planning Commission staff and their commissioners on the Central SOMA plan.
Okay, so I've made a note of the September 10th date, and we can do that without objection. Okay. All right, thank you, everyone. Madam Clerk, are there any announcements? Any other matters before us today?
There's no further business.
All right, thank you. We are adjourned.